Hi, everyone, and welcome again. Welcome to the Product Leader series. We are excited to continue this series. We are on the third episode. This series is really about creating space for honest, practical conversations with practitioners, folks who are actually not just talking about product, but also practicing product from various angles and stuff. Shaping how modern products are built is what we wanted to focus on. And right now, the conversations feel more important than ever. With AI accelerating how quickly we can prototype, build, and ship products, strong product thinking matters even more. The technology is evolving rapidly, but understanding customer needs, behaviors, and outcomes remains at the center of building products that truly create value for everyone. At Nagarro, this connects closely to how we think about transformation more broadly. Nagarro is a global digital engineering and technology services company that helps enterprises drive meaningful transformations across business and technology. A big part of our approach today is what we call fluidic intelligence, an AI-enabled approach that blends human expertise with artificial intelligence to improve how organizations operate, adapt, and deliver outcomes for our customers. What we are increasingly seeing is that the real opportunity with AI is embedding intelligence into how decisions are made, how teams collaborate, how organizations stay deeply connected to customer needs. And that brings us perfectly to today's session. We live in a world where customers have more choices and more power than ever before. They can research instantly, compare endlessly, and switch products quickly. Yet many organizations still build strategies around what they sell instead of what customers are actually trying to accomplish, right? We are really excited to welcome Jim Kalbach. Jim is an author, speaker, and thought leader whose work has helped shape how teams think about customer experiences, innovation, and jobs to be done. More specifically, many of you will know him through his books like Mapping Experiences and the Jobs to be Done playbook. He currently serves as Chief Evangelist at Mural and continues to help organizations rethink how they build more human centered businesses. Today, Jim will walk us through jobs to be done for a more human centered business and why understanding what customers are truly trying to achieve is becoming increasingly critical in an AI driven world. Jim, we are thrilled to have you with us today, and I would love to hand over and ask you to introduce yourself and take us through the session.
Great. Well, thanks for that intro. It's great to be here. Great to see everybody from literally around the world. I don't know how many time zones that is. It's more than 12, though. I'm based in New York City, so it's early morning for me, just getting my day started. But welcome, everybody. Yes, and I did want to talk about the topic of jobs to be done for what I call a more human-centered business. And I'll come back and I'll touch on that, what I mean by that at the end of my presentation. But yes, my name is Jim Kalbach. I'm the author of several books in design, innovation, and collaboration. On the left there, you'll see the Jobs to be Done playbook. I also have an online website called the Jobs to be Done Toolkit with some free resources, and we also offer training and things there too. But that's what we're going to talk about today, the field of jobs to be done. I'll talk for about a half an hour or so, and then we do have time for questions. So if you have any questions, you can put those in the Q&A panel, and we have some folks that are going to be looking at those. So hopefully we'll be able to get to your questions as we go along. Speaking of questions, I have a question for you. Why do startups fail? We've all seen the statistics and the numbers of how many startups fail. We know that 60, 70, 80% of startups fail, whatever that number is. We've heard those numbers before, right? The question I'm asking here, though, is why? Why do startups fail? And there's a lot of analysis. If you Google that question, you'll find analyses online, and I've done that. And a pattern emerges. A pattern emerges when you Google, why do startups fail? Here's just a couple of the things that I have found, right? Number one, lack of problem identification. Problem identification. Here, this one in the lower left, that's from Harvard Business Review. When they say problem, they mean what's the customer problem we're solving for? I love the one in the upper right, too. This is a survey, a quantitative survey. No market need. The reason why startups fail is no market need. 42%, by far the biggest one, right? Now you might be, as reflecting on your own situation, and you might say, yes, but I'm not a startup, Jim, right? Okay, that doesn't apply to me. But guess what? If you Google why do innovation efforts fail and why do product launches fail, you'll find a similar pattern. That some of the top reasons are we didn't understand our customer needs. We didn't understand our market, right? Now, to be fair, there's lots of reasons why startups, innovation efforts, and product launches fail, right? There is technical reasons, there's competitive forces, there are organizational reasons. But if one of the top 3 or the top 5 reasons why innovation efforts fail and product launches fail is because we didn't understand our customer needs, that's something we can address. And that's what Jobs to be Done is directly aimed at. It's aimed at understanding the market before you go start developing things. And in this sense, it's a customer discovery framework. We can think about it as customer discovery. And some of the symptoms, though, that we see that lead to those numbers are that when we talk about customer needs, we're very often not specific about them. Say, yes, we want to make something that's easy to use in this broad stroke. Well, easy to use is not a customer need, right? Also, the symptom, I see this in almost every team that I work with, jumping to solutions too quickly. You're given a challenge, and the next thing you ask is, what's the solution? Right? And you don't look at, well, what's the actual underlying customer problem that we're trying to solve before we start to conceive of something or even build something. And then there's also a lack of common language to discuss customer needs. How do we talk about customer needs? There's often no common language there, right? And then finally, confusing your solution with the customer problem. And this is one of the biggest distinctions that Jobs to be Done asks you to make, right? Using your product is not a customer job to be done. Let me say that again. Using your product is not a customer job to be done. Their goal is completely independent of your solution. Your solution is a means to the end. The end is very, very different. And if you go in with the assumption and the bias that people absolutely need my product to get their job done, you're only fooling yourself. That's the assumption that gets startups and innovation efforts in trouble, assuming that anybody needs your product. We want to separate. Jobs to be Done makes some very careful separations between the solution and the customer problem. And that's a fundamental distinction that we're going to ask you to make in Jobs to be Done. It's also the essence of this quote. When I look at this, maybe some of you have heard this before, but Theodore Levitt is a famous Harvard business professor from the 60s and 70s. And he used to ask his students, or he used to tell his students, people don't want a drill, they want a hole in the wall, right? And this is a metaphor, right? And in this metaphor, you're the drill manufacturer. And if you make drills, right, you make a drill, you're thinking about the supply chain of drills, how you're going to produce them, what the go-to-market motion is, what your price point is, brand, competitive pressures. You're going to be thinking about all of those things. And that's all fine and good. You have to think about those things. I'm not saying put that aside. That's fundamental to business, right? But what he's saying is, what if, just what if, we shift some of our attention, 2% of our attention, 5% of our attention away from ourselves, right? All of those things I just mentioned, that's you talking about you, right? Your solution, your brand, your price point, your sales motions, right? What if we just put all that aside for a moment, just suspend belief, put that aside. Let's understand what customers are trying to get done independent of our solution, right? That's the hole in the wall, right? So in this quote, for me, is the essence of Jobs to be Done, which is understand the problem independent of understanding the solution, right? It's about the hole in the wall, not about the drill. Another way to think about this is start with the outcome and work back towards the technology, not the other way around. Okay. The reason why we do this is because we see different opportunities. We see things in a different way. If we're not going in assuming that people need my solution or people, have problems with my interface or they're going to complain about my price, if we put that aside, we see the world in a different light, and new opportunities for innovation come up, new opportunities for improvement and creating value come up, right? It's only temporary. Don't worry, you'll get back to your product, you'll get back to your code, you'll get back to your go-to-market motion. I promise you. That's literally 95% of your job. We're just asking, let's shift our perspective and think about things from the other way around, right? Because people aren't walking around going, I love this drill and this drill manufacturer. They're looking at their wall going, I have a hole to make. Let's take their perspective. So Jobs to be Done is a radical customer-centric framework. And what it asks you to do is to put yourself aside temporarily. It's only temporary. Put yourself aside and let's think about the customer, right? This brings up a really interesting question is, well, how do we talk about holes without talking about drills? Or how do we talk about needs without talking about our solution? And that's what the Jobs to be Done framework allows us to do. It allows us to talk about the outcomes people are striving to accomplish without seeing it through the biased lens of our own solution, right? So we're making a very careful separation in Jobs to be Done. I'm going to make 3 points in my presentation. That was my introduction section. And then I have 2 more points that I'm going to make. Jobs to be Done is a framework that provides a shared language. It provides us a way of talking about holes without talking about drills. And we can be very specific about the customer need, right? Not just, hey, they want it easy or they want it cheap. Like, we can be very specific. Where is the friction in their job that we can address? And we do that independent of technology or solution. So our language expunges technology and solution, and we're solely talking about the customer need, okay? So that was my high-level introduction, particularly with that quote, the drills and the holes, and I may refer to that again. What I want to do now is I want to go into detail of the framework, and this is how I teach it, and this is how I practice Jobs to be Done. There are other approaches that you may find out there, and a lot of this is not in the book that I wrote, the Jobs to be Done playbook. These are things that I've learned since I wrote that book, so you may not find this in the book itself. But we can put some resources where you can learn some of this latest thinking, and a link to the canvas, which I'll show in a second as well. So I'm going to go into the weeds now. That was my 10,000 foot view. Now we're going to dive down and we're going to look at how the framework actually works. First of all, there's a core process that we can follow to practice Jobs to be Done. It has 3 larger phases. There are some sub-steps within that. I'm just going to talk about this at the kind of phase level. We need to frame our field of inquiry around the job to be done. And then we go out and we do discovery. It is a customer discovery framework. That means we're going to be interviewing customers and working with customer data. And then the spin is when you take the insights back and you synthesize them and you bring them into your workflow. That's very important. So at a super high level, you need to determine who you're creating value for and what the value is that you want to create. Then you go out and you investigate that, and then you bring that back into your workflows and you activate those findings. That at a high level is the process, right? And we use Jobs to be Done to structure each one of these phases. So the job becomes the unit of analysis. Let's take a look at each one of these in a little bit more detail. I'm continuing to double click here, and we're going to get even more detail. Along with the core process come these key elements of the framework. As I mentioned, if we're not talking about our own solution, how do we talk about customer problems? And there are some key elements, and language plays a role in Jobs to be Done. How you describe things matters a lot. And this canvas I created to help us distill the factors or the facets of information that we're looking for that build up the model. Right in the top and center there is what we call a focus job. We frame everything around the job that we've defined, right? That's why we call it Jobs to be Done. That's the unit of analysis. And we describe that focus job by 4 facets of information below it. You'll see there's job steps. How do they get the job done? Success criteria. How does the job performer measure success? Notice that the phrase success criteria is not your success criteria. In fact, I'm never talking about you. So anytime I have any term here, it's always about the customer. What is their success criteria? What are the emotions they have? And what are the situations or circumstances that they're in that make a difference in how that job gets done? So we define the focus job, and then we describe it with those 4 facets of information. And from that, we can then build models and gain insights. So that's what I want to show you right now, the core process and how that intersects with these key elements and how you work with the framework. So I'm going to continue to go through the framework in a little more detail now. Okay, step number 1, we have to frame our focus job, but it actually starts with what we call the job performer. And the job performer may not be the buyer. In fact, usually it's not the buyer. In any B2B situation, it's generally not the buyer. We tend to go downstream and look at end users and people further down. What's the value that we want to create for those people who are actually going to get benefit from our offering, right? In this case, I'm just going to use an example, a general example. Let's say we're in the field of buying and selling homes, right? This came from a project that I was doing, and I was working for a company that has an online real estate platform, right? So they're broadly in real estate, but I described their field as they're in the business of buying and selling homes. So for this example, just pretend we're in the field of buying and selling homes. First question then is, who do you want to create value for? Well, guess what? As a team, you can list all of the different types of players and actors in the field, right? There's obviously sellers and buyers, but there's also real estate agents and movers and loan officers, inspectors, there's neighbors, there's family, there's lots of different types of people that we can create value for to answer this question. So the first thing you want to do as a team is explore who you could possibly create value for, and then strategically decide, okay, we want to focus on home buyers, right? So jobs to be done is going to ask you to be very singular. You focus on one job performer at a time and one focus job at a time. If you have multiple job performers and multiple focus jobs, then you have to do a separate analysis. But for this example, I'm going to say we want to create value for home buyers. The next question then is, whoops, sorry about that. What can we help them get done? Again, everything is framed around what is their job to be done. So this is the big question here, which is going to be our focus job, which is our unit of analysis. Once I define the who, and I say home buyers, what I can then do as a team is list all of the things that home buyers are trying to accomplish. There may be many of them. They're trying to renovate a home, find a dream home, sell an old home, finance a home, decide an area to look in, shop for a new home, and more. There's probably going to be more. I'm just showing a limited set here. But let's say for strategic reasons, we want to focus on shop for a new home, okay? So in the framing stage, it's very much exploratory, and your strategy matters too, because there's no right or wrong answer here. I wish I could give you a magic formula for determining the who and the what, but it's really about what does your strategy dictate, what's relevant in the market right now, and it's also about what does your team agree on, right? So this is an exploratory discussion that you have to have with your team, answering these 2 questions. Who do we want to create value for, and what do we want to help them get done? Once you know that, then you can start a jobs to be done analysis. We use the top part of the jobs to be done canvas to do that framing activity. So you see at the very top there, we're in the field of buying and selling homes. We want to focus on job performer equals home buyer, and the focus job is shop for a new home, right? If I wanted to look at sellers, what I would do is I would copy this and I would put sellers as the job performer, and then the focus job might be, I don't know, sell a new home, right? And then we could do that. We could compare those separately, or we could even do the analysis separately. But jobs to be done is going to ask you to be very, very focused. That's a good thing. Most teams need focus, right? There's often swimming in variables. They have a dozen stakeholders they're trying to create value for, and there's dozens of things that they're trying to get done. And these conversations swirl around. Jobs to be done is going to say, okay, out of all the job performers, who is the most important? Out of all the potential focus jobs, what's the most important one? This activity of framing right now is already healthy for your team because you're already prioritizing in a very focused way. That's why we call it the focus job, because it brings focus to your efforts. So the framing stage, we need to determine the who and the what. And in this example, we have home buyers shopping for a new home. Now we can move into the discovery phase, and we can try to uncover these 4 elements. As I said, we want to know the job steps, the success criteria, the emotions, and the context, right? That's what we're going to do from the bottom up. Now we need to go out and do field work. And this begins with qualitative interviews. Jobs to be done begins qualitative. where you go out and you talk to job performers. What do you want to talk to them about? Getting the job done. You're not talking to them about your product or your price point, because they're going to complain about how expensive you are or usability of your interface and things like that. That's all irrelevant. That's all solution. We've defined our job performer and our focus job. Now we can go out and understand that focus job. That's our sole focus, right? We just want to understand that focus job, not all the other distractions that you have. Just really understand that. And we need to categorize and formulate the insights that we get into those different categories of information. Let's take a look at that. So if you're talking to someone about buying a new home, a home buyer, and they say, I want to identify suitable homes quickly, perfectly fine natural language statement, we need to translate that into the jobs to be done framework, right? And using the canvas that I showed, there's actually 3 distinct pieces of information. This is where jobs to be done gets really specific. From this one sentence, there's 3 distinct pieces of information in here, right? One of them is a job step, right? They have to identify homes. So I look at that verb identify. That's a potential job step. So I'm gonna extract that and put it in the job step bucket, and I'm gonna formulate that using the rules of formulation for job steps. The word suitable and quickly are separate success criteria, right? I want to find a home that's suitable to my criteria, and I want to find a home quickly. Those are 2 success criteria, right? Those adjectives and adverbs are success criteria. So what we end up with is identify homes, that goes in the job step bucket. And then we have 2 statements that go into the success criteria bucket: minimize the likely of finding irrelevant options, and minimize the time it takes to identify potential homes to consider, right? And starting with the word minimize, and you'll see these are very regularly formulated sentences, statements. We end up with a collection of statements that are very, very structured and rigorous and formulated consistently. What I'm going to end up with is I'm going to end up with 12 to 20 job steps. I'm going to end up with 50 or more of these success criteria statements. I'm going to end up with emotions and circumstances as well, the other 2 categories. And I'm going to I'm going to be able to get really specific about what the unmet need is, right? We can get very specific with it. So this is where jobs to be done gets really granular. And it makes distinctions. It makes important distinctions between these elements. Job steps are different than success criteria. So if I go back to my jobs to be done canvas now, at the top in purple there, that was our framing activity. And now after I do my discovery, I can fill out this canvas with the elements of the jobs to be done framework. The job steps I can reduce and put into what we call a job map, which is a chronological sequence of steps. So now I have a job map. That's a nice artifact that I can work with my team with. For instance, if you're a home buyer, you have to decide to shop for a home, determine your criteria, identify places to look, learn about the market, seek available homes, compare them, assess your criteria, confirm selections, and then decide on a home. Very simple, high level. Those are the job steps. Notice there's no technology in there. You don't log in, you don't enter a search term, right? I don't even say, log in online. It just says, identify sources to look, right? And we can ask ourselves, how did people search for a home 50 years ago before the internet, right? They had to figure out where they were going to look, right? Classifieds, magazines. Sometimes people drove around the neighborhood and looked for, that's just identifying sources to look. What are we going to do in the future? I don't know. Probably use some AI tool or an agent. Maybe you have an agent, but you still have to figure out where to look, right? So these steps then become timeless. So one advantage of removing technology from our language is we also put longevity into our analysis. The success criteria, this is how the job performer measures success. If the job steps show how do you get from point A to point B, the success criteria answers the question, how do they know they did it well, right? They minimize the time it takes to do things. They minimize the lack of knowledge and so forth and so on. So we have this big collection of success criteria. We also have some emotions and circumstances, right? So after the discovery, we go out and talk to people and we extract all of these little details. And these statements are kind of the material with which we use the jobs to be done framework. We have job steps separated from success criteria, separated from emotions and circumstances. We can then prioritize each one of these buckets separately. We can say, which is the job step that's hardest to get done? Which is the success criteria that's hardest to achieve? Which are the most predominant emotions? And what circumstances matter the most? So we carefully separate everything into these discrete categories of information, the yellow, the green, the orange, the pink, and the blue. And then we prioritize them. But now what I can do is I can bring these prioritized elements back and come up with a very, very specific and clear pain point from the customer's perspective that we're trying to solve, independent of technology and solution. And that's what a job story does. So I'm going to move into the third phase, which we call spin, where we have to now synthesize this and bring it back into our teams, right? And a job story has three parts, like a user story, but it's very, very different from a user story. A user story describes functionality, right? It describes the solution. This describes the problem. That's why we call it a job story. There's no mention of technology in here. But here's an example. When I'm comparing available homes, in orange there, comparing available homes, that was a job step that we prioritized. I put this in there, not randomly. I'm not just writing. This is in creative writing. This is me taking the hardest job step and putting it at the top of my job story. And I'm unfamiliar with neighborhoods. That's one of the circumstances. Whether people are familiar with the area or not was one of the circumstances. And I prioritized that. I want to be able to get an immediate sense of what it might be like to live in a specific area, right? This is a product vision. This is an ideal capability. It's not describing features and functionality. It's what should an ideal solution do? Think of that middle element as a vision that points forward into the solution space without specifying anything in terms of the solution. So I can reduce the lack of knowledge of the neighborhood and feel confident about my choice of where to live. That's a success criteria in green and an emotion there in the red. So we defined the focus job. We went out and researched it and understood each of those four categories separately. But once I prioritize it, I can reconstitute them into a job story. Now I have a clear, in a single sentence, I have a clear and specific pain point that we want to solve for, right? It's not make finding a shopping for a new home easy. It's they need help becoming familiar with the neighborhood so they feel confident about their choice, right? That's a different challenge to solve, right? We haven't specified any solution yet. This is all in front of what is the ideal offering that we should create, okay? Another thing that I can, so that's synthesizing my research down to a single pain point. I can also use my analysis to compare the unmet needs in the market back to my an existing solution, for instance, because a lot of you are working in situations where you have a current solution, right? So let's say that's the case. What I did here on the left is these are the top 3 success criteria that are unmet. We call these unmet needs, right? Remember, we had that big bucket of success criteria, 50 or more of them, and I can prioritize those. What I did was I took the top 3 out and I said, okay, if these are the unmet needs here, minimize the chance of exceeding the budget, minimize the need for renovations, and minimize the lack of knowledge about specific neighborhoods, I can compare that to my solution as described by discrete capabilities. If you were to take your solution and describe it as capabilities generically, what I can then do is I can use what's called the product market fit matrix. I can look at, here are the needs, here's my solution. How well do we support people in getting those outcomes met? And I can use a scale, a 3-point scale. One is does not support, and those are gray. One is partially supports, and that's light green. And then strongly supports is dark green, right? So I can look across and I say, minimize the chance of exceeding budget. Guess what? We have capabilities that really strongly support that, right? And there's even a partially support here. If I look at this row going left to right on the first one, but if I look at this one down at the bottom, minimize the lack of knowledge about specific neighborhoods, you'll see we don't have any capabilities that really address that. So our understanding of the market need was independent of technology, but now I can come back and compare our solution to it and see how well we're supporting it, right? I can also look at the columns, by the way, and I can see here capability number 5. That really doesn't target any of the top unmet needs in the market. Maybe you don't need it. So this is a diagnostic tool that you can do after you do the discovery. You can take all of that information that we carefully separated into those buckets, and we can start to manipulate it. And we can start to get a picture of What should we be doing? What should our roadmap look for next quarter? What should be new features and functionality that we bring in and highlight within our existing solution? And this is one way to help you do that. You can even use jobs to be done insights to write OKRs or set goals, customer-centered goals. Jeff Gotthelf and Josh Seiden wrote a book called Who Does What by How Much? And they advocate for customer-centered OKRs. They're advocating for customer-centered OKRs. A lot of times an OKR is, build something or achieve a certain revenue level or something like that. What they're saying is, guess what? In order for you to grow, customers have to take some action. Customers have to take some, there's some behavior that you want to generate in customers. Make that your OKR. And the formula to do that is also the title of the book. Who does what by how much? And that's their little calculus for creating customer-centered OKRs. Guess what? This overlaps with jobs to be done. If I've done my jobs to analysis, if I've done the jobs to be done analysis, home buyers, the job performer, that can be my who. Does what is they meet their unmet needs. They achieve their unmet needs. They can learn about a potential neighborhood thoroughly. And then by how much, that's a metric that needs to be specific to your context. That's not going to come from your jobs to be done analysis. So you need to think about what's a baseline metric and how long they can do that. For instance, in this case, I said in under 5 minutes. So home buyers can learn about a new potential neighborhood thoroughly in under 5 minutes. Because I did my jobs to be done analysis, I have a lot of confidence that that is a problem worth solving. That our chances of failure go down because I know if I can get a solution that addresses this need, that the market will say, yes, how did you know? Give me more of that. That's product market fit, is about creating a pull. You want to create a pull and you want to anchor that and memorialize that at the OKR level. One more thing that you can do in this spin phase that I'm talking about is you can take your jobs to be done insights and the analysis that results from it, and you can build it into what we call a opportunity solution tree. You can map your goals and solutions to the jobs. Teresa Torres wrote a book called Continuous Discovery Habits, and she talks about this artifact here called an opportunity solution tree, OST. It's called the opportunity solution tree. At the very top, you put what's the business goal that you want to achieve. The next level down is what is the customer need that you're going to address, and what's the behavior change that you're going to get that reaches that business goal. Below that are the solutions that you're exploring. Okay. And below that, there could even be like an experiment or a prototype that you create, or some smaller piece of that. The point is, we can create a taxonomy and a hierarchy of, we have these solutions. If we get this done right, customers will have this behavior change. That is, they'll meet their unmet needs, and that will help us grow. So you literally connect these things together. Why are we building this at the solution level? Is because we're going to help people get this job done, and getting that job done drives our revenue ultimately, or our business goals, right? So this is a simple taxonomy where you can embed right there in that middle level, the customer opportunity. You can put your jobs to be done target or your job story that I just showed you, right? If we help people understand more about neighborhoods, they'll use our platform more, or whatever our top level business goal is. So jobs to be done then can be used in a variety of ways. I'm just showing you a couple of things. But once you end up with that analysis, there are a dozen or more things that you can do to help inform your solutioning, right? And as I said at the beginning, jobs to be done is all about the problem. Sorry, I meant to say it's all about the problem, and it's not about the solution. But you want to be able to take that insight to inform your solutioning, and that's what we do in the spin cycle. These were just a couple of examples on how to do that. There's more that we could talk about. I'm going to move on in the interest of time here. But again, we had our core process. So the core I'm going to come back up now. So I got really, really detailed there. And by the way, the point of that was to not train you to do it. I don't expect you to be able to do jobs to be done analysis. What I wanted to do was impress upon you just how systematic and rigorous the process can be. It's very, very detailed. You go out and talk to people, you collect these little statements, and then you prioritize the statements. It's very detailed work. But at a high level, you need to determine the who and the what. What's the value you want to create? Then you go out and investigate that. And then you take those findings and you synthesize them and activate them through things like OKRs and opportunity solution trees. There's even more simple techniques that you can do in the spin cycle there too. So the second big point I want to make is that jobs to be done is a structured language that integrates human-centered opportunities into value creation. And it provides the rationale for what you should focus on, right? And that's the big benefit of jobs to be done, I believe, is focus. It tells you with a lot of specificity what's the problem that you're trying to solve. And it gets your team aligned around that. Just a couple more points, and then we can go into Q&A here. That jobs to be done is not a product or design framework. It actually came from the business community as a way to understand market behavior in general, which means that any part of your organization can use jobs to be done, right? There's even a way to use jobs to be done to help define your corporate strategy. I've worked with marketing teams to help them develop campaigns. I've worked with sales folks to help them do better discoveries, right? Obviously for product, you can do that capability matching that I showed to match user needs with capabilities. I've worked with customer success teams to help them understand what does success look like for their customer from their customer eyes, right? Guess what? More monthly active uses of your product, that's not customer success. That's your success. Their success is getting their job done. So we make those important distinctions and so forth and so on. So this is a framework that becomes a common language potentially for your whole organization. And that's what happened at a company called Intercom. Des Traynor was one of the founders of Intercom about 15 years ago. And they used jobs to be done from the very beginning. He's a designer and innovator and knew about the jobs to be done framework really well. And as a founder of the company, they brought it in. And as he writes, it wasn't just a great way to think about product. It became the marketing strategy as well as informing research, sales, and support. So they're using this framework very broadly across the organization to help them understand market needs. Also at a company called Stepstone, which is a large career platform in Europe, in the UK and Germany. We trained about 400 people in product organization there. And they're now using jobs to be done very broadly to understand what the appropriate design is and how to structure their roadmaps. And they've even come up with this ritual of embedding unmet needs into their product requirement documents. So at the beginning of a product requirement document is, here's the unmet need we're trying to solve for, right? And that's part of their rituals now. So third and final point, that jobs to be done is a way of seeing. And I was trying to impress this at the very beginning, that it's a mindset shift, right? We're going to temporarily shift our attention away from ourselves and focus solely on the individuals that we're trying to create value for, right? And we call that outside in insight. We want to see things the way our customers see it, not the way that we want them to see it or think that they're going to see it, but how they actually see it. For what I call a more human-centered organization, right? It's not enough that you have a CX team over there doing NPS and you have a user research team over there doing user research. We need everybody to be thinking in these terms, right? And there's no reason why you can't. Think about your requirements documents, your roadmaps, your sprint planning, your design sprints, all of those things. Imagine if they were all infused with a deep and specific understanding of the customer problem. That's how you get to be what I call a human-centered organization. So with that, I'll leave that and I'll just say thank you there, and we can go to some questions.
Awesome. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead, Pragat. We do have some great questions that have popped in right there. So folks have already dropped in. I think we've got 3 or 4 questions here to answer.
Yeah, thank you again, Jim, for a wonderful session. I know there is a lot to cover, but I think you covered a lot of bases here. Before we jump into the questions, I just wanted to ask a couple of things from you. As like, for the folks who are just about getting started to learn about jobs to be done, even though it was available for a long time now as a tool that you can use for, like you said, business and your product thinking and for various different situations to understand them, right? What is the best place for folks get started?
So that's a great question, because what I showed you was my core process. This is if you want to do a proper jobs to be done analysis from beginning to end. frame the focus job, you go out and you do discovery, and then you take that back in and you integrate that into your workflows, right? However, there are simple parts of that that you can just grab onto, like a playbook. That's why I wrote the jobs to be done playbook, because these are kind of individual techniques that you can use, right? One of the easiest and first best things that you can do is create a job map. Define a focus job and create a job map. What are the steps of getting that job done independent of your technology? You can't refer to any solution or technology, right? Just create that job map and then use that to have a conversation with your team and say, what are we trying to do next quarter? What's the job step we're trying to help people get done? Very simple thing to do. Just create a job map. And that's all qualitative. It does not take very long to create a hypothesis job map. If you want to go out and validate it, you can too with some customers, but you can create a job map very, very quickly. AI can actually help you create a job map. It's quite astounding that you can get some of that analysis out of AI. But having that independent view, sitting down with your team and saying, okay, forget about our sprint coming up, forget about our problems with our current user interface or whatever you're doing. Let's just forget about that. Let's just focus for the next hour on the customer and what they're trying to get done and try to align as a team. That's one thing that you can do, create a job map. Another thing you can do is express a customer pain point as a job story, again, independent of technology and solution. So a job map, you can just do a job map. You can write a job story just as a way to express the pain point that you're trying to create. So there are parts of the framework that you can use independently, and you don't have to do that whole thing that I just showed, right? Simplest thing though, the simplest answer is just stop your team and ask, what's the customer job here, right? And I've been in product teams where you're talking about each other and politics and personalities and timelines and pressure and we have all these things, all these variables we're trying to juggle and you're in this conversation, but guess what? That's you talking about you to yourself, right? And what you want to do is use this mindset shift and go, boink, what's the customer job to be done? And suddenly the conversation goes in a different direction. So the absolute simplest thing you can do is walk into a room and go, what's the customer job to be done before we get started? Fantastic. And see what the answers are. You probably get disagreement. That's the thing, is that everybody has their own mental model about what the value they're trying to create. What jobs to be done is it gives you a language to get aligned around what is the customer value we're trying to create.
Totally agree. Hugo, take away with the questions.
Yeah. So Jim, starting off with the questions, the first one we have is coming from Mishan. And it's, how should we handle the problem of customers articulating jobs at the wrong level of abstraction? Yeah. I mean, sometimes the explanations are too broad to be actionable or too narrow to reveal real opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I'll just tell you right now, they will articulate things at different levels of abstraction, right? And they will talk not in chronological order. You want them to talk in your terms, which are jobs to be done terms, in chronological order. So you sit down with a job performer and you say, tell me about how you get started getting that job to be done. Guess what? The first thing they say is not how they get started. There's always something that happens. And then you got to ask, okay, what do you do before that? You're also going to say, just tell me about this job. They're going to go in the stratosphere. They're going to talk about their happiness in life or whatever up here. They're also going to go way down in the weeds, and they're going to talk about the button on your interface or some specific situation that happened. This is a key skill of doing these jobs to be done interviews, is that what you're trying to do is, as the interviewer, you're trying to steer them to speak more chronologically and also to get them at the right level of abstraction. But what you're going to end up, remember I said jobs to be done begins with qualitative interviews. What you're going to end up with is a lot of noise to signal ratio, or signal to noise ratio, low signal to noise ratio. So jobs to be done is like being a detective. Jobs to be done is like being a detective. This does not come at you all at once. You might do an hour-long interview or half an hour-long interview, and you might only pick a couple of these clues together. If you've ever seen a detective movie, right, they very often put a timeline on a blackboard, right? And then over the next days and sometimes weeks, they go out and they talk to people. Sometimes they talk to people and they get nothing. Sometimes they talk to somebody and they get one hair. They go to a crime scene and they get one hair, and then they put it on their timeline, right? That's what you have to be like a detective. People are not going to articulate things in the language that you want them to. And that's your job, is to translate it and to say, oh, that was too high, that was too low. The reason why we define the focus job up front is because that becomes our normal center of gravity. That tells us what too high or too low is. That's the thing we want to understand. So by anchoring on the focus job, you can then right size different levels of abstraction or different variations in language or different chronologies, right? We then normalize all of that. So we're taking irregular feedback. Jobs to be done is a framework that takes noisy, messy human feedback and it passes it through the framework, namely that canvas that I showed, so that you get very regular information on the other side. That allows us to then build strong models and to do comparisons a lot better. But that's your job as the jobs to be done researcher. Your market is not going to tell you these answers. And
yeah,
this is really hard too, guys, by the way. This is hard. In my opinion, this is harder than building a product. Understanding human behavior is very, very, very complex, right? And as I said at the very beginning, that's where a lot of businesses go wrong. They said, hey, we got this wonderful technology, or Joe had a great idea. Okay, let's make a startup. And they're not doing the hard work of understanding human behavior.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. The picking away at the threads until you get to the crust of exactly what things are.
Yeah.
So next question, right, Matt? Sorry, Jim. We've got in enterprise projects, the roles overlap. Example, manager and end user. How to prioritize jobs when there is no overlap, is an overlap or even a clash?
Yeah, sometimes there is an overlap. And you know, that framing phase that I talked about, sometimes it's very clear. Sometimes the framing phase is very clear. Like the business that you're in and what you're trying to do as a provider, it sets you up for a very, very clear job performer and very, very clear focus job. Other times it's not clear and you need to sit with it for a while and do exercises with your team and say, who are we actually creating value for? Oh, wait, if I describe them that way, that's too big, that's too small. And you swirl around the who, the question of the job performer. Same thing on the job side. You might formulate a job, oh, that's too big, that's too small. And you might swirl around there. And, you know, just as an example, I was working on a project once and it took me about 2 weeks to formulate the right focus job. I had to let it sit and I had to explore words to get the right focus job. But this can be a team activity. And I think that's really interesting team activity to say, who are we creating value for and what are we trying to help them get done, and have that as a team activity. And then you can formulate that focus job. You also need to know about where you are as an organization, right? We don't want to do a jobs to be done analysis on a job performer and a focus job. That's irrelevant to the organization, right? So you need to understand what are the gaps in knowledge that you have strategically as a company or a team, right? Where do you want to focus your attention? And that might be a point in time. The answer might change next year. The company that I was working with the example that I used here, the real estate platform, they said, no, we're focused on home buying right now, not on the selling. They service sellers. Why didn't we pick sellers? Because that's not where they were strategically. They were focused on home buyers. So there's a lot of fuzziness and discussion that happens up front to help you understand what that focus job is. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, I actually related to that, Jim, right? Because supposing you start and you get your team together, you get a job story, everybody's on the same job, right? They're like, oh, this is definitely it. They put it together. This is the job we're going to be solving for. But I'm guessing there's chances where you might reach a conclusion where even halfway through the work being done, you're on the wrong job, right? Do you change directions completely? Is there sometimes where you should actually just double down because that's the job you're going to solve for now? What do you suggest in those cases?
Yeah, I mean, part of jobs to be done is you shouldn't be that far into developing things, right? So you don't want to have to make that hard pivot later on, right? You want to do that up front. But what is more common, Hugo, is that I sit down with my team and we explore the job performers. I sit down with my team, we explore the focus job. We define a focus job, and then we go out into the field. And I'm in the second interview, and I realize that that's the wrong focus job. That happens all the time, that by going out in the field, you learn more about how to frame the focus job, and then you need to go and course correct. But I haven't started building anything yet at that point in time, right? But the point is, you know, I said frame, discover, focus. Frame, discover, spin, as if it were straight. It's not a straight line. And this is the complexity of understanding human behavior. and then you need to describe that human behavior in words. And then you go out in the real world and it's even messier than you thought. Human behavior is really, really messy and fuzzy to understand. And we're trying to put it through a very, very clear filter and get things pure on the outside. It's never going to be pure on the other side of that, right? So there's this negotiation between reality and my modeling or my understanding of reality that you need to do. Sometimes that waffles a lot. Other times it's not. It's more stable. So there's no one answer there, Hugo. It's just you gotta go with the flow. But here's the end. Here's the end, though. Any solution you put out there will be determined. The success of any solution you put out there will be determined by the market. So at some point in time, you're going to have market feedback. You want to get that market feedback as early as possible and try to understand the need before you do that, right? Because we've all been on projects or efforts where you launch a feature or a solution or a whole new thing, and it just kind of lays flat in the market. Right? I've been on those projects before, right? And what we're trying to do is avoid that as upfront as possible.
Yeah, I love that.
Sure.
I love that.
There is plenty of bad software there in the world.
Yeah, I've done it. Yeah, we've all done it, right? So that's
one
what we're
last
trying to
question,
fight
Jim,
against. Yeah, go ahead.
close things up. And this is an interesting one, right? Because jobs to be done is another framework. And the question comes in, can I replace jobs to be done framework with the customer journey map in design process?
Yeah.
Because again, there's so many things we do supposedly customer centric, right?
Yeah.
And jobs to be done replace them, or does it work alongside
I
them?
think it complements them, and it definitely doesn't replace this here, because a customer journey map, right? And I wrote a book on customer journey map, so I'm a fan of customer journey map. We still have to do that, right? We still have to do usability tests. We still have to do sprint. I mean, we still have to do all those things. I see jobs to be done very much as a complementary framework, right? And because it's so far up front, it can feed into design thinking or customer journey mapping. It can feed into lean and agile, right? Just think about lean for a second. Let's say a lean startup. I mean, if I want to create a hypothesis statement, right? We believe this idea or this concept will create value for these people, right? And those people are the job performers trying to get this thing done. That's the job, right? I can basically take my insights from jobs to be done and create a hypothesis statement, right? That then sets off an experiment, right? So jobs to be done I see as an upfront engine of inquiry that feeds into a lot of the existing disciplines. Now, a customer journey map is very different than a job map. A job map is from the individual standpoint, what are they trying to get done and what are the steps there? A customer journey map, part of the clue is right in the term customer journey map. I'm seeing the individual as a customer of my solution. So therefore it is solution centric. It's how do they become aware of my solution? How do they learn about my solution and decide to acquire it? How do they then use my solution? That's a customer journey map. And almost all customer journey maps begin with become aware and purchase and use and get support and then leave or whatever. It's a matter of perspective. And I see a customer journey map and a job map as orthogonal to each other. A customer journey map describes their relationship to you, and a job map describes what are they trying to get done independent of me or anybody for that matter. So it's a different analysis, and it comes at a slightly different point. Again, you need the customer journey map and all the great design work implied in that question there. But what jobs to be done can do is provide deeper insight into those things, but it doesn't replace them. So don't worry, you don't have to get rid of all that great work that you're doing, but jobs to be done will actually supercharge it and make it stronger and more precise.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Jim. We're on the last few minutes, right? And conscious of time, just any final message for the group, for the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is around the mindset shift, right? And just know that when you have a great piece of technology or a great business idea, that's biased. It's biased by the assumption that anybody needs that thing that you're trying to create. And what we want to do with jobs to be done is bring a little bit of humility back to the table. And we want to say, nobody needs my solution, and not make the assumption that that's going to solve their need. And we want to go in with a blank, kind of a beginner's mind. We want to say, what is the real problem that they're trying to solve, right? Before we start going forward with our solution. So that mindset shift, right? Don't focus on drills, focus on holes. That mindset shift, I think, is core to jobs to be done. And it gets rid of some of those symptoms that lead to innovation failure and product launch failure. It points right at addressing those things. There's no guarantee, but I think assuming this mindset shift at a team and even an organizational level, that's where you get real customer centricity. Right? We talk about customer centricity and it's, yeah, we're customer centric. We do NPS. It's like, nope. Are your goals customer centric? Are your roadmaps customer centric? Do you understand the problem you're trying to solve? Right? That's where customer centricity for me really happens. And I believe it begins with a mindset shift and a little bit of humility, that jobs to be done requires you to be very humble about things. You're not the master of how to get that job done. They are. And we're trying to take that perspective. A little bit long-winded, but I hope that answered your question.
No, but it's a great way to finish things off, and I think it's a good message. And Jim, thanks so much for joining. Right, just for the audience. Before I let Pragati go ahead and finish off, I just want to ask folks, right, we'll keep having these series once a month, and we already have a lineup of the next 3 or 4 speakers. So keep posted. We will share details, and we'll share the video of Jim's talk, obviously, so people can rewatch it, relearn it, and watch. Many folks, you have to see it in speed up, right? I think here people need to sit down and absorb.
Slow it down.
Real value out of it, because there's so much to analyze. There's so much great content in there. Right. So hopefully the audience felt the same. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you in the next one.
Yeah.
And thank you, everyone. Again, thank you, Jim, for taking the time. Appreciate all of your time. Until next time. Thank you. Have a good week. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers. Thank you.